Can you still adopt a former racing greyhound in the United States? You can, but it might come from Ireland or Australia. On this episode, we have an international greyhound rehoming panel to tell you all about it. Stay tuned. Greyhound Nation is next. This is Greyhound Nation, episode 39, recorded August 27th, 2023. International Greyhound Rehoming Roundtable. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for greyhound enthusiasts produced by greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm producer Michael Burns. And now, here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, Greyhound lovers, to the best Greyhound podcast in the world. We've got an international set of guests today from down under in Australia, from Canada, and from the USA. Our guest in the first part of the show is going to be Sean Stanton with Greyhound Racing Victoria. And then in the second half, we're going to bring on two pioneers of international greyhound rehoming, Tina Kelly and Rory Goreé. But first, let's talk to Sean. Sean, welcome.
Thanks, John. Thank you for having us.
Now, you are the Greyhound rehoming manager for Greyhound Racing Victoria. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've been in the role for just over 10 years now, and some would argue I've got the best job in the world. Rehoming these beautiful dogs to their forever home, it's certainly a great job, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be hired as the rehoming manager.
Yeah, so I've got family have been involved in both greyhounds and thoroughbreds for a number of years. My late father was very passionate about greyhounds, and from a very early age, I was spending quite a lot of time at the tracks. And probably when I hit 17 or 18 years of age, I dabbled in a little bit of ownership in greyhounds, in syndications and whatnot, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Spent quite a lot of time at the trainers' facilities, handling the dogs, playing with the dogs, and I think I was 21 when I adopted my very first greyhound. Her name was Roxy, and she changed my life, and from that day on I was converted. So I've been in my current role as rehoming manager now for just over 10 years, but prior to that I'd previously managed one of the racing clubs here, the Rory Goreé Greyhound Racing Club, for 3 or 4 years. And my current role, I guess, being the rehoming manager, I guess my role, I'm ultimately responsible for overseeing our two dedicated greyhound rehoming facilities. I also manage a lot of the relationships with the other rehoming organisations, and ultimately GAP, or the Greyhound Adoption Program, and Greyhound Race Victoria are responsible for the promotion of the breed. So it's for over half my life I've been involved in greyhounds in some capacity, and obviously currently in the role of rehoming manager.
If you've been in the role 10 years, I imagine you were the first rehoming manager, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. They had a welfare manager, but not so much a rehoming manager. And there's been quite a lot of change that's gone on here in Australia in the greyhound space. And I think the biggest change that I've seen probably 10 to 12 years ago, you would very rarely see a greyhound being walked on the street. Now not a day goes by where you don't see multiple greyhounds. So we're obviously doing some really good work in that space. But yeah, I'm the first rehoming manager for GRV, and as I said, it's a job that it's very rewarding. Absolutely, we have our challenges from time to time, but obviously it makes it all worthwhile when you get to work with the dogs. And I think the most important part is that we have a wonderful team dedicated to the breed and the program, which makes my job a whole lot easier.
Did you have a challenge when you first took on the role of convincing trainers and owners of the wisdom of making sure all their greyhounds were rehomed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first step that I made was to make the program easier to access and more accessible. So obviously, in the state of Victoria, we are our tracks are spread across the entire state. So I think the first change that we're able to make was we made it as easy as possible for people to enter their greyhounds into our program. And we have staff who currently are on the road 2 days a week, travelling across the state of Victoria, bringing dogs into our program. So there's absolutely been that shift, which has been great. We've removed any barriers ultimately for people who are wanting to enter their greyhound into our program. So it's been really well received. And yeah, there's certainly at the moment no shortage of participants wanting to put their greyhounds into our program.
What's the current infrastructure in terms of physical plant that you've got there in Victoria? Is there an adoption kennel at each track? Is there a central adoption kennel somewhere? How do you house the dogs before they're placed into homes?
It's a really good question, John. The program was actually started back in 1996 by two vet nurses who had an absolute passion for the breed, and it was around 1997, 1998 that Greyhound Racing Victoria brought the program internal. And yeah, we currently are now set up really well. We have two dedicated facilities with capacity for over 200 greyhounds to be in our kennels. So we have basically an operation site where the greyhounds will come into that particular facility. They'll undergo some behaviour training. They might go through our vet clinic if they need some medical or veterinary works done. We have our foster care dogs go from that facility. So on that particular site, we could have anywhere up to 120 greyhounds at any given time. And then we have an additional site, which is very close to the CBD in Melbourne, which is ultimately acts as our adoption site. So we can generally have up to 80 greyhounds at that facility. So I guess with our program, at any point in time, when you take into account dogs who could be in foster care, we have an award-winning prison program, a prison pet partnership program. Our program at any point in time could have upwards of 250 dogs that we're responsible for. But yeah, as for our infrastructure, we have two dedicated facilities. We probably have over 40 staff at the moment, obviously spanning from permanents to casual. And that's been a really big shift. When I started back all those years ago, we had our site, but in that time, we've been able to grow our infrastructure and ultimately expand to a secondary site. So I think the biggest investment that Greyhound Racing Victoria has made in recent years has been around welfare and integrity, and obviously it's allowed us to grow and expand our program.
Does your program, aside from the international aspects of it, do you place greyhounds outside of Victoria in Australia and in the other states?
So yeah, it's a good question. So you find that we actually just last week we had a national greyhound adoption program conference. So each of the states that conduct greyhound racing, they have their own dedicated greyhound adoption program. So ultimately we don't cross over states, but it's great to see all the states investing so heavily into welfare and rehoming, which is great. I think back in 1996, the Greyhound Adoption Program was first started here in Victoria, and it's great to see now that all the other states who conduct greyhound racing have their own similar type program. Absolutely, we all do it somewhat differently, and we act independently, but then we have the ability, like last week, where we're able to come together and speak about what's working, what are some of the challenges and opportunities moving forward.
Tell us a little bit about the relationship and the working partnership between the official rehoming agency, which is, I believe, Greyhounds as Pets. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we've got. It's interesting. So when here in Victoria or Melbourne, we were the very first program to start, and we have the name of the Greyhound Adoption Program. I think we currently have half of the states that are recognised as the Greyhound Adoption Program, and the other half is Greyhounds as Pets. So here in Victoria, our program is the Greyhound adoption program. Yeah, we absolutely work closely with a number of the other rehoming groups. I think it's very different here in Australia to the US. I've been lucky enough to be in the presence of yourself and others, and Rory. I think probably the one difference from here in Australia to the US. In the US, there's quite a large number of groups who are pro racing. Here in Australia, a lot of the groups are neutral, so that's quite different. In saying that, we do work really closely with a number of the Greyhound rehoming groups here in Victoria. They're obviously volunteer-run groups. They do incredible work. These volunteers, they generally have full-time jobs, they have family, they have other commitments, but they still manage to find time to do some great work in the volunteering space. So we absolutely work closely with them. We meet regularly with those groups. We actually financially fund some of the groups. So the relationship's strong. And I think that was one of my views when I commenced in the role. I asked the question, what are we doing with the other rehoming groups? And at that point in time, the question was, we don't do anything with them. And I said, well, surely here's an opportunity where we're all ultimately trying to achieve the same outcome. Why can't we work together? And it's great. I have some wonderful relationships now with some of these rehoming groups. So it's terrific.
And are the Greyhound adoption program staff people, are they employees of Greyhound Racing Victoria, or are they volunteers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all employed by Greyhound Racing Victoria, who is the statutory body here in Victoria. So Greyhound Racing Victoria is ultimately responsible for, I guess, the regulation of the sport, but also the promotion. And yeah, Greyhound Racing Victoria invests heavily in the rehoming and welfare space, and as a result of that, our staff we're all employed by Greyhound Racing Victoria, and they're a great organisation to be a part of. They have a genuine love for the breed, and they really look after their staff well. So we're in a very lucky position to be in the position that we're in at the moment.
And do the two groups, or the multiple groups, such as Racing to Rehome and Greyhound Adoption Program, do they do their own individual screening and so forth of adopters, take in the applications, do their own screening, do their own placements, et cetera, or do they coordinate between each other?
Yeah, that's a really good question, John. All the groups work independent of one another, and a lot of our processes are somewhat similar. And I think that's a good thing about working so closely with the groups. We're able to share information and processes and whatnot. So we've worked really closely with a lot of these groups, but ultimately we act independent of one another. But like I said, the application process that adopters go through is all very similar. The actual adoption process is very similar. So that's the benefit of working closely with groups, that we can share information and work closely together without obviously still working independent of one another.
Give us a little feel for what the typical process would be for a Greyhound coming into the Greyhounds adoption program, from the point that the trainer or the owner decides, okay, it's time for Speedy to retire. What happens at that point? Through the rehoming till they go into their actual adoptive home?
Yeah, that's a good question. So here in Victoria, there's a 28-day wind down period. So once the Greyhounds have completed their last race or trial, we say prior to rehoming the dog, it's good to give them, I guess, a little bit of a letdown before they actually go into their forever home. So here in Victoria, the process would be, I'm the owner of Speedy. I would make contact with Greyhound Racing Victoria, and I'd put Speedy on the list to come into our Greyhound adoption program. There's generally a couple-month wait before the dogs can actually be booked into a session. So once they put their name on the list, in the not too distant future, they will be allocated a slot at one of the sessions that we conduct around the state of Victoria. So there's 8 different locations that participants can book their dog into. So once they get allocated that particular session. They'll be allocated a slot. They'll bring their greyhound along to that particular session. Prior to coming to that session that they're allocated, the greyhounds are required to be vaccinated. And the good thing about our industry participants, greyhounds are regularly vaccinated, which is terrific. And the greyhounds are required to have been desexed. So they'll come into our one of our 8 locations. They'll undergo a short temperament assessment, generally with a medium size or smaller dog breed. Providing that all goes well, the greyhound will then basically be transferred into our care. So an ownership will be transferred to the Greyhound Adoption Program. And from there, we will work through the process to get that dog into its forever home. So the dog will come into our care. Within 24 to 48 hours, we'll give the dog a secondary behaviour assessment just to see the behaviours of that particular dog. And those assessments are really important. It allows us to gain a greater insight as to what type of home that greyhound will be most suited to. Whilst they're in our care, we find that some greyhounds absolutely benefit from going into foster care for a period of time. So some dogs will be allocated to foster care. We have an internal training program. Some greyhounds we feel would benefit from some further exposure to other breeds of dogs. So we may put a dog through our internal training program. From time to time, some of the dogs might need some basic veterinary work. We're lucky enough that we have a veterinary clinic on site at one of our facilities, so they may go through that. And some dogs we find are suitable to be advertised for adoption. So basically, once the greyhound gets to that point, we obviously advertise them through various channels, primarily through our website. And then we wait for the adopters to make contact with us, or on some occasions, we'll actually reach out to an adopter. We might have an application there that will suit a particular dog, and once that comes in, we'll reach out to that adopter and facilitate the adoption.
What's the typical adoption fee?
Yeah, it's a good question. Here, and it varies from state to state. Here in Victoria, our adoption fee is $100. And obviously we have the benefit of that, the benefit of being funded through the greyhound racing industry. And for dogs who are 6 years and over, and we classify them as seniors, their adoption fee is $50. So I guess when you're looking at adopting a pet, and there's plenty of designer dogs out there that people will spend thousands of dollars on, I couldn't justify it myself personally, but you're looking at a purebred dog, if you were to get the dog through our program, who's been fully health checked, desexed, wormed, vaccinated, microchipped. Obviously, the greyhounds who we adopt out come with a special martingale collar. They come with a rug, an information booklet. And I guess one of our biggest selling points about our program is that we're there for the lifetime of the greyhound. So we'll offer support the entire way through the greyhound's life. So I think when you compare a greyhound as a pet compared to designer dogs, I scratch my head when people go down the path of little dogs.
Yeah, it's a deal that can't be beat, that's for sure. Now, you mentioned that the owner is responsible in turning the greyhound over, is responsible for bringing vaccinations up to date and having the spay and neuter work done. So I suppose in that sense, they help fund part of the rehoming costs. If I got that right?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, because in recent years, what we've done here in Victoria, and you'll find that most of the other states that race here in Australia do the same. Greyhound Racing Victoria actually has a desexing and dental scheme. And what that is that once your greyhound retires from racing, you have the ability to put in a request to Greyhound Racing Victoria, and Greyhound Racing Victoria will cover all of, if not most of, it's generally the entire amount of the desexing and the dental side of things. Absolutely, the vaccination rests with the participant. So we're saying that you need to have your greyhound vaccinated prior to entering our program. But with regards to the desexing, and we obviously want our greyhounds to have sparkling clean teeth, we will cover the costs of both the desexing and dental.
What about when a retirement is required by virtue of an injury? Maybe you have a fracture or something like that. Who funds the repair, the treatment and repair of the fracture?
Again, there's another scheme that we have which allows industry participants, if the dog's injured on track whilst racing, they have the ability to go through the Greyhound Recovery Initiative, who, again, GRV will assist the participant with funds towards not only fixing up a potential injury, but also then some of the costs with the rehabilitation. So again, it just shows GRV's, or Greyhound Racing Victoria's, investment into not only rehoming but the welfare. So again, it's terrific that we are in a position to do that. And we know, even if that wasn't the case, that our participants, so passionate about the breed and the industry, they would do that themselves. But in saying that, Greyhound Racing Victoria, again, are there to assist the industry participant.
Let's talk a little bit about the current state of Australian Greyhound racing, particularly in Victoria. How many tracks do you have there in Victoria?
Yeah, we have 13 tracks. There's one particular regional track that they were looking at redeveloping. I'm not quite sure where that's at the moment, but I think here in Victoria we have 13 tracks. You got other states like New South Wales and Queensland. I think New South Wales has upwards of 20 and Queensland has 5 or 6. But I guess here in Victoria we have 13 tracks. We're obviously not as big as Queensland geographically in New South Wales. So we have 2 what we would classify as metropolitan tracks, which are based in and around the city ultimately. And then we have 11 regional tracks. So as an industry, we conduct around 1,100 race meetings a year. It's quite a large industry. We would have thousands of participants, and I think, racing at the moment is really strong. I think, and don't quote me on the figures, but I think it's over $70 million in prize money just here alone in Victoria that industry participants can race for. So obviously our industry is funded by wagering. The state of racing right now is really, really strong, and we hope it will continue to be for many years to come.
Yeah, if memory serves, you have a couple of races there in Victoria, and I think maybe 1 or 2 in New South Wales, with the purse money, the winner, not divided, but the winner gets $1 million Australian. Is that, if I got that right?
Yeah, you're spot on. The prize money is incredible, and I think back to a little racing female we have at the moment called Wow She's Fast, who was, I think, just the other night awarded Greyhound of the Year for Australia. But her prize money is close to $2.5 million. She's had probably just over 30 race starts, and it's incredible to think that a female racing greyhound who's only 3 years of age, that has only had probably just over 30 starts, has had the ability to win $2.5 million, and that's life-changing prize money, John. If it's incredible. So there's been a number of dogs who have cracked the $1 million mark in prize money, and it just shows how strong the industry is right now here in Australia.
How about attendance at the track? Every sports betting venue now, the punters have their phones or their computers as a way to put down their bets without having to go to the track. Has that affected attendance at the tracks themselves much?
Absolutely, it's affected on-course attendance. I think when we hold our feature meetings, so some of those Group 1 races that we call them here in Australia, we absolutely get a great turnout to the track. But to your point, here in Australia, it is so easy, whether it's on free-to-air TV, you can watch thoroughbreds, or through pay TV, you can watch the greyhounds. But then everyone has, most people these days have some type of smartphone, and through the various apps and the wagering agencies, you can watch thoroughbreds, harness, and greyhounds basically on your phone. So absolutely, it's had an impact. But in saying that, wagering has continued to grow in recent years. So it probably highlights that you don't necessarily have to have huge attendance on track for wagering to be heading in the right direction. And I think many years ago, when I was much younger, when my father would take me out to the track, you had bookmakers there, and you had a really good crowd. Those days are sort of somewhat behind us, because whether you watch them on your phone or you go to the local hotel or the pub that we call it here in Australia, you'll find that in most hotels or pubs there'll be racing live on the TV. So it's very different, I guess, probably to the US in that regard. But in saying that, yeah, it's everything can be done now from the comfort of your lounge chair at home, to be honest.
Is there still a social aspect, particularly at the metropolitan tracks, where you might go with your family or work friends or that sort of thing and have dinner and make an evening of it?
Absolutely. And I think you'll find that particularly the two metropolitan tracks, so one is out at Sandown, they conduct their feature race night of the week of a Thursday, but the Meadows, which is probably only 15 minutes from the Melbourne CBD, Saturday nights, it's a great place to go along for, to your point, a social catch-up, a gathering, a friend's birthday. And you find most Saturday nights, if you were to wander out to the Meadows, they have a great crowd. It's a wonderful facility. It's incredible. So close to the city. So absolutely, throughout the course of the week, at your regional tracks, you probably don't get the attendance that you would have 15, 20 years ago. But certainly at our metropolitan tracks, the Meadows and Sandown, they absolutely get great attendance.
How is Greyhound rehoming promoted there, particularly at the metropolitan tracks? Do you have your own little space there that people walk by and you've got a couple of greyhounds to be rehomed there as kind of the ambassadors of the breed?
Yeah, we do. I think you'll find, if you're to ever tune in and watch greyhound racing here from Victoria, you'll find that we have signage about the greyhound adoption program on most of the tracks and the facilities, but probably more so on our larger feature race meetings. You'll find that we will have a presence at those particular meetings. We're very lucky, the Greyhound Adoption Program here in Victoria. We have an incredible base of volunteers who volunteer in many ways. Some of it could be as simple as enrichment. They go to one of our two facilities and interact and play with the dogs and walk with the dogs. We have foster care, which is such an important part of our program. But we also have community engagement, and that's when people who have a love for the breed, a passion for the breed, they'll generally put their hand up and attend race meetings like you've just touched on, John, where they would take their dogs out. They'd have some gap banners there and hand out information to people who are wanting to learn more. So we absolutely, where we can, we're working closely with our greyhound racing clubs, who are obviously very passionate about the rehoming side of what we do. So it's we're a team within a team ultimately, and at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same outcome, which is putting these beautiful dogs into their forever home.
What are your current challenges? As we sit here in late August 2023, in terms of the greyhound adoption in Australia, in Victoria, in terms of the number of applications you're getting and that sort of thing. Has that we had a spike here in the U.S. during the COVID lockdowns, and I suspect it was the same in Australia, where people were home and their thoughts turned to, well, let's get a dog. And now, of course, that's changed. What are your current challenges these days?
You've hit the nail on the head, John. That's the reality of it. I think here in Australia, it's an interesting time. I think for probably the best part of 14, 15 months now, we've had consecutive interest rate hikes, which is obviously people at home are feeling the effects of that. During COVID, we were very lucky that we're able to continue to operate. And during COVID, I think people who wanted a pet, whether it be a cat, dog, a guinea pig, were able to get those pets. So we did see through COVID, we're able to rehome quite a number of dogs. So I think all those are contributing factors to some of the challenges we have at the moment. Obviously, our adoption numbers remain strong. However, in saying that, we probably are finding that we're not getting as many applications through as what we once was or were, I should say. You'll find that going back probably 5 or 6 years ago, the demand was that great. We would put the onus back on the applicant if they were interested in one of our dogs, that they look on our website and make contact with us direct. We've sort of changed our approach now. We're probably more active, more proactive in following up those potential adopters. So I think right now our biggest challenge is that, we need to continue to generate interest in this beautiful breed, and obviously as a flow-on effect, see more applications come through. So it's not lost upon us that we have to continue to promote our program and promote our breed. And we do some wonderful things via social media. I think we would have close to 100,000 followers on our Facebook page. So we have a marketing strategy for the next 12 months, and hopefully as a result of that, we'll continue to see an uptake in applications. And any promotion that we tend to do here in our state, there's a positive flow-on effect to the other rehoming groups who do incredible work in that space as well. So if there was one single challenge right now, we would love to get more applications come through. And we're still getting applications coming through at a steady rate, don't get me wrong, but we'd love to see a bit of an uptake there.
So Sean, to kind of surmount some of those challenges of domestic rehoming, you've gone international, so to speak. Greyhound Racing Victoria has, as has New South Wales. And so we thought we'd bring in, at this point, two of our pioneers of international Greyhound rehoming. The first one is Tina Kelly. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about where you hail from and how you got into the international aspects of Greyhound adoption.
Well, I adopted my first Greyhound in 2003, so I've been doing this a little while. I attended a conference out in Massachusetts, I want to say probably in 2012, where there were some guest speakers from Ireland who had come over to talk about racing in Ireland and what was going on over there. And at that point, to be quite honest, it was almost like a light bulb moment for me of, this is where I think we should be transitioning over to. And from that point in time, I, built my relationships, built my contacts, went over to Ireland, was able to meet with the GRI and the IRGT, and started.
You better tell us what that stands for.
Tell
us what those initials stand for.
So GRI is Greyhound Racing Ireland, and IRGT is Irish Retired Greyhound Trust.
Very good.
And from that point, I had noticed through social media, I would probably say late 2018, 2019, I had made contact with Racing to Rehome in Australia, and we were starting our conversations to connect, and unfortunately COVID hit. So our program with Australia stalled until late last year, and we were able to pick that up again.
Yeah, the first time I heard your name was when Rory called me, and we'll get to Rory here in a minute, and said, I know this lady that knows a bunch of people in Ireland. Maybe we should get her to make some introductions and talk to those folks about bringing Irish Greyhounds over, because by that time the Florida vote had happened. We all saw the writing on the wall in terms of what were going to be the numbers of American Greyhounds available for adoption. And so let me take this opportunity to thank you for making those contacts and making the introductions to Rory and I.
You're very welcome.
Had you actually traveled over there to meet some of these folks?
My first travel over was before COVID hit, so I believe it was 2018. Um, I'm kind of a boots on the ground kind of girl, so I wanted to go over and actually be able to see, all of the pros and the cons and be able to speak to people here in Canada about exactly what's going on from my experience and not hearing from other individuals, whether they be inside or outside of the industry in Ireland. So I've been back a couple of times. I've had the opportunity to purchase my own Irish racing greyhounds and see them race in Ireland and have them retire and currently at home with me. So it's been a fantastic experience.
Who did you meet when you went over there the first time? How did you go about? I'm sure they were. Who is this Canadian person coming over here? Is she an
Um,
auntie? What's her situation?
no, actually, I was
Did they
very
welcome you,
fortunate.
or were they skeptical?
No, not at all. So I was very fortunate to meet um, a lady by the name of Bridget Frank, who has been in the industry for many decades, whether it be training, rearing, coursing, or racing. And so that was my segue and my opportunity to actually go out and visit some of the breeding farms, some of the trainers, some of the bigger farms out in Ireland, go to the racetracks, meet veterinarians and what they experience over there. So welcomed with open arms from every aspect of the industry, which was great.
That's great. Give us a little plug for your organization, both its original name and its current name.
Oh, so the original name was Greyhound Trust and Alliance. So we originally started off many moons ago as a support group. And we've evolved over the years. We started off as Flight when we started bringing over the Irish Greyhounds. So it was finding loving Irish Greyhounds homes together. We evolved to add Salukis to that mix. I'm quite partial to that breed as well. And as we launched the Australian program, we changed the I from Irish to I to international.
Very clever usage of the acronym, I must
Well,
say. That's great.
we tried.
Well, let's bring in Rory Goreé. Rory's well known to anybody in U.S. Greyhound adoption. He's the former president of Greyhound Pets of America. He's also been on the Arizona Racing Commission, which governed both Greyhound and Thoroughbred racing. Rory, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here with you, Sean and Tina.
And I want to thank Rory for something as well. Rory and his wife Kathy once hosted a Greyhound radio show on Voice America. They had me guest host a couple of times. I kind of caught the bug. They decided to not renew their contract to continue that show, although you can still hear it in archive version. And I had the idea. I said, "Well, why don't we just start a podcast?" Everybody else was doing a podcast, so Rory, we credit you with the planting the seeds of the Greyhound Nation podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Greyhounds Make Great Pets. That was a fun show, but it just kind of got to a point where it was a little overwhelming to continue doing. But thank you for taking it on and keeping it going. But
tell us a little bit about what. Go ahead.
Oh, well, you had mentioned when I had called you about Tina Kelly and the name she could get us in contact with. Prior to that, Tina, now a lot of people may not know this in Greyhound racing here in the United States. A lot of our farms, and back in the day in Arizona, we had 70 farms at one time, and a lot of them would always have an Irish stud dog on the farm. And so we had some Irish Greyhounds here in Arizona years ago, and I ended up adopting one when he was done, and we gave him a real original name and called him Patty. But Tina had called me, and I think we were talking about because of Florida, if I remember right. And Tina just said something to me when we ended our call, and she's like, Rory, don't forget about our Irish Greyhounds. And that just really played on my head for the longest time. And that's when I finally said, with Florida, what's going on, we need to reach out and get this going. And I got to thank you, John, for taking that program on and running and making it very successful.
Yeah, it was, so many people when the Florida vote happened, we were all disappointed. And there was all this, it's the end of the breed and this and that and the other. And we said, well, there's Irish Greyhounds, there's Australian Greyhounds. Oh, that's impossible. You can't do that. It's going to cost too much money. Well, we were just kind of determined to show them that it could be done, and it was done. And it's been a great success. I'll never forget that first telephone conversation that you and I and Tina had with Barry Coleman and Jared Dollard, the CEO, the then CEO of GRI, and I don't think they believed us when we told them how many we could rehome, but they do now. So
you're right, John. They did.
It's been a great. It's been a great, successful program, and is continuing to be a successful program. And so, Rory, you kind of segued that from getting the Irish Greyhounds program started to looking into the Australian program, particularly with Greyhound Racing Victoria. How did that come about? What got your interest up in that?
Well, you had mentioned I had been on the Arizona Racing Commission, and also as president of GPA National, I'm kind of one of those that is always kind of looking as to where are things going. And to me, it was obvious where we were going with Greyhound racing in the United States. I kind of saw that it was eventually going to come to where we are today. But Sean and there was a couple of other people had come out to Abilene, Kansas one time, and Gary and I got to meet with them and start talking about it. And I think even at that point in time, I maybe had mentioned, how many Greyhounds we were getting here adopted in the United States, and that as time goes on, we would have a need for Greyhounds because the people over the years that have adopted them, they've just loved this breed and continue want to have one in their home. And then I think it was, Sean, a couple of years went by, and you actually came out here to Arizona, and we spent a day at Turf Paradise watching the thoroughbred races and quarter horse races, and also talking about Greyhound adoption. And it's just ballooned since then. The Greyhounds have been coming in. I think COVID did kind of put a little crimp on slowing us down a little bit, but I think we've overcome that. And I think the biggest thing we now need to do here in the United States and Canada is just make sure the people are aware that these dogs are available. I was just talking to Kathy yesterday, how we both have seen so many people on the various social media sites just that, their dog Greyhound just passed away, and they're just so bummed that they're never going to get another Greyhound again. It's like, no, there's Greyhounds out there. There's plenty of Greyhounds out there. Get back, get in the game, stay in the game. And these dogs are wonderful. I may be, it's just one dog, but I've also adopted a Greyhound from Australia. His race name was Gotham Duke. We call him Velodia, but his kennel name was Mike. I will tell you this: this is the most pet-ready Greyhound, and I've had a lot of Greyhounds in my house. This is the most pet-ready Greyhound I have ever had. He was over 5 years old, and because they don't race every 3 days in Australia like they did here in the United States, this dog has a lot of spunk still in him.
That's great. That's great. Sean, let's turn to you a minute. Rory mentioned your trips to Abilene. What first planted the seed in your brain about, hey, there's a market over there in the U.S. that we might ought to tap into over here in Australia? What year was that approximately?
I've been lucky enough to travel over to the US on a couple of occasions now. Obviously, the meeting that Rory's talking about, he's on the money. It was 2019. But I guess my first venture over to the United States was to learn a little bit more about the rehoming landscape and the racing side. I wish I could take credit for it, but the whole idea behind the flight program, the brainchild behind it was a lady by the name of Rebecca Miller from Racing to Rehome, who had a passion for the breed. She has her own rehoming group here in Australia, and she met with Carla Feller and Moira Corrigan there in Seattle, and it all stemmed from there. So again, our ability to have that relationship with another rehoming group, Rebecca spoke to me about her vision, and from there, we took it upon ourselves to visit Arizona, and we caught up with Rory, and we sort of started to get a feel for the landscape and if there would be an appetite for Australian dogs to be flown to the US. And from there, it's just gone on in leaps and bounds. So I'm grateful for Rebecca and her team at Racing to Rehome to have basically been the ones who were able to get this program off the ground, and they continue to send the dogs to the US, and we assist where we can. So it's a wonderful program, and it's great feedback that Rory sort of provided about Gotham Duke. It's very consistent with the feedback we've received from a lot of the rehoming groups that the dogs that they're receiving, they're in great order, great condition, they're pet ready, and it's great they're living such a great life in the US.
And this may be an unfair question because you may not have the figure right at your fingertips, but do you know about how many, since the program began, how many Greyhounds GRV has sent over to the U.S. and Canada for rehoming?
Yeah, so the program, the Greyhounds are being sent through Racing to Rehome, so we obviously support them in their efforts, but ultimately it's Racing to Rehome who are the ones who are sending the dogs. We work very closely with them, but to date, I think the numbers a little over 250 Greyhounds have flown. And to Rory and Tina's point, just when things were starting to gain real good momentum, COVID hit, and we were hit very hard by lockdown laws here in Australia, which didn't allow us to fly. So, yeah, we're over 250, heading closer to 300, and currently we're able to. I think there's been Greyhounds from Australia or from Victoria or Melbourne have gone to 11 different US states. So it's really gaining some momentum, and it's great that we can work with not only Racing to Rehome but the groups in the US to pull this together.
What have been some of the routings that you've undertaken, Sean, in terms of, obviously there's not direct flights from Melbourne to every major U.S. city, so you have to do a little shuttle work. Where are you sending them, and what cities are they going to?
Yeah, primarily a lot of the early flights were going direct to Los Angeles, and then there's other options such as Vancouver and Dallas. The one thing that's been so remarkable, it just highlights the passion for the breed there in the US, that some of these groups are travelling very long distances, staying away overnight to collect these greyhounds. Obviously, it's really important that we're identifying the most suitable groups who are able to participate in this program. But yeah, the logistics is somewhat challenging. But in saying that, we're able to make it work. And the most important part is that the greyhounds who are travelling, they're coming out of the flights bouncing, which is great. Obviously, first and foremost, the welfare of the greyhound is the number one priority. And it's great that we find that they're able to travel for that long distance, and they're coming through it with flying colours. And Tina can probably speak to that better than what I can, because she will have seen it firsthand that the greyhounds, they just they deal with the flight, and then they get off at the other end and they're ready to go to their forever home.
Mm-hmm. They've done really well. What I like about the process is it's slow. It's not rushed. The dogs fly out of Melbourne into Vancouver. They overnight in Vancouver. They're allowed to decompress. They go into a boarding kennel. They get fed. They go for a potty break. And then they're put on the flight from Vancouver into Toronto. And it was the first flight at the beginning of the year was speaking with Racing to Rehome of, do you plan on having more dogs? And I said, we really have to see how the dogs acclimatize to this kind of travel. And all 4 dogs came out just bright-eyed, ready to go. And, like 24 hours later, I was contacting Racing to Rehome and said, yeah, we're going with this. We're going to kickstart this program because the dogs look fantastic and they dealt with everything really well.
Yeah, it's a point I think can't be made strongly enough because there are so many myths. You see it repeated, particularly on social media. Oh, I would never fly a Greyhound in cargo. It's such a terrible way to go. And yet every Irish Greyhound I've seen come over and all the stories I've heard about the Australian Greyhounds, which are even a longer flight, they step out of those crates like they own the joint. And there's not one been had a problem with flying. I like to say they're probably more comfortable snoozing down there in their crates than any of us would be sitting in an economy seat with a kid crying 2 rows back. So I think we cannot emphasize that point over and over enough, that the travel does not harm them, cause them any anxieties or anything like that. They're ready to get out of the crates for sure. But it's been an amazingly successful from the welfare and well-being of the dogs program that they handle these flights as well as they do.
They do, and they're monitored every step of the way, and at every checkpoint, the receiving group receives notifications and updates and pictures of the dogs. So you know exactly how the dogs are doing at every stop. And so you have a really good idea and a judgment of, what you're to expect when the dog comes bounding out of the crate on the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Rory, let's talk a little bit about, we can't let the episode end without some discussion about a certain, I'll call it a confab, that's planned for Australia in 2024. Tell us a little bit about the concepts there.
Well, I think, John, you will remember in Greyhound Pets of America that years ago it used to be the GPA National Conference. And at some point in time, I forget what year I did that, I changed it to the North American Greyhound Adoption Conference. And that was to open it up to all the Greyhound adoption programs. We could get together, learn from each other, learn what we need to be working on, just that type of thing. And I've kind of had it rumbling around in my head because to get our volunteers engaged, they need to know about the cause that they're being asked to be engaged on. And so I just really thought, and also it's nice to know about the dogs. While I hear the stories from Sean and Mel and Sean, who were my dog's trainers over there, it would be nice to learn a little bit more about them. So when we're talking to potential adopters, we can tell them a little more history of what we know. We've been there, we've physically seen it. And so it was just kind of a natural thing to say, hey, the conferences here in the United States, there's really nothing for us to gain. There's no cause here really anymore. Let's go where the need is and let's go and learn what we're going to be working on. And so I had just kind of contacted Sean and Tina and said, hey, would you be interested in maybe us putting together a conference in Australia? And everybody was on board.
What are some of give us the specifics as they stand as we speak tonight? What dates are we talking about? Where is it going to be, and so forth? I know it's very much in the planning stages, but what have you got so far?
Let Sean go for that.
I'll throw that one to you, Rory.
Oh no, that would be more for
let
Sean.
Sean go. He's going to be the host.
I'm happy. I will be correct, John. So we're talking most likely October next year. we looked at a number of dates, but we feel that springtime in Melbourne, there's no better place to be. And ultimately, we're thinking that it's a great opportunity. We've got some wonderful things to see here in Melbourne, but it's an opportunity for people to come over and learn more about not only the racing side of it, but obviously the rehoming. So I think there'd be parts of the trip where people would spend some time at our head office at Greyhound Racing Victoria with an opportunity to meet with our CEO, perhaps head out to one or two of our leading trainers to get a greater understanding of what they do to prepare their dogs to race and what that looks like. We'll also catch up with one or two of our leading breeders who can speak about what their involvement in the industry is and how they go about certain things. And when you talk breeders, we're hoping there'll be some little pups on the ground, because we know that will be a very big selling point to see some Australian Greyhound pups. Then there'd be an opportunity to go to one or two of our education facilities. And I think the part that most people would find quite interesting is just going to one or two of our race meetings, because I think I've been lucky enough to visit some of the US Greyhound racing tracks in the past to see how things are done. It's done fairly differently here in Australia, so I think that would be really interesting. And then potentially have a catch up with the likes of Racing to Rehome, who are the brains behind this USA rehoming program. And then here in Melbourne, we have some wonderful touristy things to look at. There's winery tours, there's a whole range of things. So we want it to be educational, but we also want it to be enjoyable. So that's what we're working towards.
Would it be open to anybody that's involved in greyhound adoption in the U.S. and Canada?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at, and we're mindful. This would be the very first one that I will have conducted for visitors from overseas. We've been lucky enough to have people from domestically travel to Melbourne, but we're working through that at the moment, and Rory and Tina have some great ideas on how we can best promote that to the rehoming groups there in the US. So we're certainly looking at everything at the moment. But as I said, I think Australia, if you haven't been here before, it's a great place. And it'd be a great opportunity for people to not only have a bit of a holiday, but also get to interact with some greyhounds and just see how things are done here in Australia. And I think we're all in all doing a really good job at the moment.
Does it have a working name as yet?
Myself, I'm not much the marketer, and I know Rory's really good in this space. So I'm going to defer to Rory.
Yeah, we've had a couple of,
or yourself, John. Yeah,
we've had a couple of ideas, but I should have had it out by now. But that's on me for slacking. But I think here in the next couple of weeks we'll come up with something. I'm sure some people will like it, some won't. But the whole thing is to get down and to learn about these dogs and learn about the cause and how to get involved in getting these dogs over here. Because I'll tell you, just with my own dog, it has been a really fantastic experience. And I mean, when we got Gotham here at the home, my wife is looking up to see who his owners were, and she contacted them. And then within hours, they're sending us his baby pictures and all his litter mates. And it's just been so fantastic. So I think people are really going to enjoy getting to know not only the Australian Greyhounds, but the Australian people involved.
Rory, where will people be able to go to keep up with the planning and the dates and that sort of thing? Will there be a website, or what do you plan on that?
We're planning to have a Facebook site up that people will be able to go to, and I'm sure we'll be making an announcement when we have that up on your Facebook page, the Greyhound, so that we can just kind of keep it all there and keep up and hopefully get a good turnout for this event.
Well, we'll be glad to publicize it. I think it's a great idea. Sean's come over here so much we can go over and see him for a change. And, how long's that plane ride, Sean?
16
from
hours.
LA, yeah.
How long?
Yeah, 14
16
and a half,
hours.
actually. 14,
16.
Okay.
14 and a half. 16. I must go on the fast planes. I can get there in 14 and a half, but it's always longer coming over here apparently. So you might be right, Rory. It probably is 16.
Still, it's well worth it. I think Australia ought to be on every American and Canadian's bucket list. It certainly is on mine. And, I'm a fan of all the great Australian movies and so forth. So, yeah, it's definitely. And the opportunity to see some races there as well. Maybe you could, Sean, can you get us an introduction to While She's Fast while we're there?
That would be part of the plan, to be honest. If we're able to get this off the ground, we'll, providing I can speak to Jackie and Cal Greeno, who look after her, I'm sure we can sort something out.
Well, folks, it's been a great conversation. We really appreciate your spending the time with us. And Sean, you're speaking to us from the next day. That's how far away we are here. But thanks for giving us your time. Rory and Tina, thanks again for all the pioneering work you've done in international greyhound rehoming. It's definitely the not only the way of the future, but the way of the present, and probably always will be. So thank you for your hard work, your dedication, and it's a great thing for the breed.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll see you again on the next episode of the Greyhound Nation.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're not a regular listener, be sure to follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Grey Nation Show, follow us, and you'll get notifications every time we release a new episode. You can also get new show notifications when you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you like the episode, leave us a review on our Facebook page or your favorite podcast app. You can also send us feedback or questions via the contact form on our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. Thanks to our guests this episode, Sean Stanton, Rory Goreé, and Tina Kelly. You can learn more about our panel's Greyhound rehoming efforts at the websites listed in our show notes. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.